Hi, my friends. Hi, fellow INFJs, fellow non-INFJs. Welcome to this room, which is not my room, which is an Airbnb room. And this is my second video in a row in 2 days, which might be released as a weekly video because I have a bit more energy these days for that. I'm even more energized by the fact that, I'm with my wife and I'm so happy to be reunited with her. So I wanted to share some more thoughts on this idea that INFJs are a little bit over-victimized. To an extent, I think that they have a tendency to fall into the trap of victimizing themselves as well, a little bit. And that could be a negative kind of vicious circle. Most vicious circles probably would be negative. But following up from this idea of reinterpreting the INFJ door slam as anti-banishment, as I explored in a video that was released. Well, I released it earlier today, but probably will be, in a week. That would be last week. So we'll explore further this notion of how to de-victimize INFJs from themselves, or they should be, they should de-victimize themselves. Before I move on to my topic, well, maybe a good way to start with this is to check out this book, The Ecstatic Soul, my book on the INFJ, which you can get at the links below for less than $10. It's a bit of a classic. Most in-depth study of the INFJ you can get your hands on, and The Infinite Castle, which is my novel, which, if you want to support my work and explore what's rumored to be an INFJ in fiction, an alienated INFJ in fiction, you can also get that links below for less than $10, and you can support me on Patreon. More and more bonus content to come, and small but growing community, and with the possibility of more and more services. So consider supporting me there, because it really helps the channel, and as I navigate more future, uncertain or more demanding times as a newly married man, new job, new country, it just massively supports me. It's anywhere from €3 a month. So, and again, you get to interact with me more personally and all these things. Okay, so coming back to this idea of victimization. Let's just go back for a second to the thoughts that I had been developing in this more, relatively recent video on NI banishment. So one of the ways, in which I kind of was trying to debunk the idea of an INFJ door slam as something that was kind of mythological and, in fact, subtly perverse, not good for INFJs. Not just false, but perverse, is the idea that a lot of people still think, and it's sold by some YouTubers and articles, that the INFJ door slam is basically, if you wanted to really just provide like a big picture sort of image of it, is the INFJ suffers, they're empathic, they are willing to give a million chances to whoever might take advantage of those chances. And there just comes a point where it's a point of no return, boiling point, whatever you want to call it. But, it's like, it's the, in French we have a phrase, la goutte d'eau qui fait déborder le vase, It's like the little raindrop that makes the water vase overflow. So the idea is that an INFJ would be super victimized, and once they just cannot have enough, they put an end to it, and there's no coming back. And of course, this is a slight exaggeration, because there will be people who say, "Oh, I was door slammed by this INFJ, and I don't know where it came from. I don't get the impression that I victimized them," or something like that. And yet, the door slammed me. Now, on the one hand, the traditional arguments might go like this, well, you might not have noticed, but the INFJ felt victimized by you nevertheless. But because they're introverted, they're not necessarily good at expressing it, they're not necessarily good at preventing worse stages of this victimization from taking place. And then once it takes place, the door slam kicks in, and the INFJ is never coming back. But the way that I think about it these days, in terms of like this NI banishment side of things, is that sometimes people don't realize why they were door slammed, because they never really got into in lockstep or in resonance with the INFJ's unique sort of visionary Anna, and making it even more difficult that the INFJ, although they will have a strong gut feeling of what this, this source of prescience is, might not even be able to tell themselves, what it is or articulate it. That's why they need to be vocational, need to cooperate with other people, but they also get a sense of, okay, maybe this person is not going to help. In fact, it might hinder me, so I need to banish them. But you see, from the moment that you do this, from the moment that you interpret the door slam as a specific INFJ phenomenon, right? So you move away from the more traditional concept of the door slam of the INFJ, which is way too general to apply specifically to INFJs. It's something that people like to tell about themselves. Like to think, I'm an INFJ and I do this. So, oh my God, it's one of the door slam, one of the, super defining features of the INFJ and what makes them unique. Chances are these people fantasize about the INFJ and, they might not even be INFJ themselves, because again, I think most INFJs who really are INFJs will more so be familiar with the idea of being emotionally forgiving. INFJs are emotionally forgiving, and they will let you come back emotionally. If you like, the points of real tension, the point of no return, the point where, if you like, they are unforgiving, is not a matter of emotion. Emotions are mixed in and contribute to defining this sense of banishment. But it's actually it's something much more intuitive. It's something much more having to do with they conceive, how they view what they want to do and how they see the world. And if you're posing a threat to that worldview and to the further articulation of that worldview, they will banish you, and they will do it unforgivingly, but they will do it as a matter of, where emotions are put aside. Emotions are put aside not because there's been too much and suddenly emotions become dead. It's a nice little story we tell ourselves, but that's not how things work. Emotions don't go dead in the case of the INFJ, or if they do go dead, it will be something that they share with other types that have been through similar traumatic experiences. No, it's something that where they're able to kind of leave aside emotions to make, I don't want to say necessarily a rational decision, because it's an NI-driven decision, and NI is not a rational decision by itself, but there is an element of rationality in the sense that the exclusion, the banishment, obviously has an FE element to it, and FE is a rational function. It's a social rational function. So it's more rational than emotional ultimately. And this is something that people don't necessarily understand when they're not super familiar with INFJs. So again, once you get to that plane of interpretation, once you get to that mode of analysis, there's a switch that happens. You might not even realize, but actually it's an important switch, because you move away from this idea that INFJs are just walking empaths that are shy and that are always susceptible of having their, demands made on them by their empathy, by the vampirism of other people, until it gets too much and they have to cut ties. And you're moving towards this more victimized notion to a much more empowered notion. So no longer are INFJs victimized in this interpretation, but they are empowered. They're empowered to make the decision to banish. And they make the decision to banish often at a point where they are not emotionally overwhelmed. They anticipate it. INFJs, they do look ahead. They do see ahead a little bit. They're a little bit ahead of the game, They're not like 10, 20 years ahead of the game, like some articles would have us believe about INFJs and INTJs because of anti-dominance. But they are still a little bit ahead of the game. They do see further ahead than most people because that's how they're built to think that's how they're built to intuit. So they prevent what they perceive to be a potential threat. But when the decision is made, it's a decision that's made with, support of the NI vision, which is not a rational product of perception. It's perception, inner perception, but nevertheless perception. But then delivered through the use of a social rational function, which is the FE function. So it's a cold decision that's not triggered by a history of abuse necessarily. It's more a cold decision that's triggered by a pattern that doesn't match and that the energy perceives as a potential threat. But the threat isn't really given the chance to develop to the point where it becomes really hard to deal with and then proper emotionally draining. So it's really a decision that the INFJ makes with the full empowerment of an agent and not as the last ditch reflex mechanism of the hurting victim. You know? And you see, this might look like it's a subtle difference, it's a subtle distinction, and you might even argue that this whole idea of anti-banishment is a little bit abstract. And one of my purposes in future videos and also my future book is to try to move towards, okay, this is how the anti-banishment concept is articulated in its more theoretical form so that you can really explore it in depth. And then once you've said that, let's look at practical cases, make it easy to convey to a broader audience, because it has ultimately to speak to a broader audience. The reason why the victimized conception of the INFJ door slam, which is again an INFJ door slam, works with so many people is easy to convey. It's inaccurate, but it's easy to convey, so people resonate with it. So the challenge will be to bring this more fine-grained and accurate, I believe, conception into a mode of speech that is sufficiently articulated and sufficiently clear and easy to convey that a broader audience can relate to it, and not just a small circle of people who constantly think of the theory of the INFJ. So that will be one of the goals. But never forget that behind this, there is also a goal of mine, which is not a theoretical goal, but it's a goal, I wouldn't necessarily have to say of changing the world for INFJs, but maybe changing the overall perception of INFJs by non-INFJs and also by INFJs themselves, away from the notion of being a victim and more toward the notion of being an empowered agent. And the thing is, when you're an empowered agent, you have the freedom to make decisions that are not always going to be popular. As long as the picture of the INFJ is someone who's always making decisions that people are going to like or are going to find, admirable or endearing, the walking empath sort of thing. Well, in a sense, you're kind of admitting in an indirect way, right, in a roundabout way, that you're not empowered. An empowered agent is also an agent that is capable of making tough, unpopular decisions, including the anti-banishment. That is not the sign of someone who's evil. That's the sign of someone who is willing to make decisions for themselves, regardless of what other people may think. Although, with an INFJ, there's always be attempts, via FE to justify that to the circle of those people that remain part of the collaborative projects as part of the higher vocational purpose of the, either the enlightened INFJ or the INFJ headed to enlightenment. Let me know in the comments if you understand where I'm getting at with a view to move away from victimization and toward a more empowered agent view. And if you agree with it, what are your thoughts? Let me know. And don't forget, you can support me on Patreon. It really, really helps. And there are bonuses. See you then, guys. Bye-bye.